The morning I came home from the hospital, my daughter-in-law was already rearranging my furniture. I stood in the doorway of the house I had built with my own hands 31 years ago. The house where I had raised my son, where my wife Eleanor had grown roses along the back fence every spring, and I watched Nicole drag the old green armchair, the one Eleanor always sat in, toward the hallway like it was garbage waiting to go out to the curb. She didn't hear me come in. She had her earbuds in, humming something, completely at home in a house that wasn't hers. My son Marcus was standing near the kitchen, watching her, holding a mug of what I assumed was my coffee. He saw me first. Something moved across his face, not guilt exactly, more like the quick calculation of a man deciding how to explain something he knows looks bad. "Dad," he said, "you're back early. We thought the discharge was this afternoon." I looked at the chair. I looked at my son. I looked at the chair again. "Put it back," I said. Nicole pulled out one earbud. She smiled at me, that particular smile she had, the one that never quite reached her eyes, the one I'd been trying to decode for the 3 years since Marcus had brought her home and announced they were getting married. "Harold," she said, "the physical therapist said you need clear walkways. We're just trying to make things easier for you." She said it the way you talk to someone who doesn't fully understand their own situation. Patient. Practiced. "Put the chair back," I said again, and I went to my bedroom and closed the door. I sat on the edge of the bed, and I listened to the muffled sound of the chair being dragged back across the hardwood floor. Then I heard Nicole's voice, low and sharp, and Marcus's voice answering her in a tone I didn't recognize, a tone I didn't like. Outside my window, the maple tree I'd planted the year Marcus was born was just starting to lose its leaves. September. I had been in the hospital for 11 days, following what the doctors called a mild ischemic stroke. My left hand still didn't feel entirely like mine. My speech was fine. My cognition was fine. Everything was essentially fine. But I had been frightened, truly frightened for the first time in a long time, and in that fear, I had made a mistake. I had called Marcus. I had asked him to come stay with me for a while. I want to be clear about something. My son is not a bad man. Marcus grew up kind and funny, and he had a good heart once. I believe that. But Nicole had spent 3 years working on that heart the way water works on stone. Slowly, patiently, until the shape of it changed without anyone quite noticing when it happened. They arrived 2 days after I called. Nicole had already done what I would later understand was research. She came with folders. She had printed out information about power of attorney. She had printed out articles about cognitive decline following stroke events. She had a name and number for a specialist she said was just wonderful and really helped families in our situation navigate the paperwork. She referred to it as our situation. She used the word navigate. I thanked her. I put the folders on the kitchen counter. I did not touch them again. What I did instead, the very next morning while Marcus was still asleep and Nicole was at the gym, was call my attorney. Raymond Kowalski had been my attorney for 22 years. He handled my business contracts when I was running the contracting company. He handled Eleanor's estate when she passed 4 years ago from pancreatic cancer that moved faster than any of us were ready for. He knew me. He knew what I had and he knew what I wanted done with it. "I need to come in," I told him. "I was wondering when you'd call," Raymond said. I drove myself. My left hand was still a little uncertain on the wheel, but I drove myself because I needed to know I still could. What Raymond and I discussed that morning, I will get to. But first I need to tell you what happened in the 6 weeks between that conversation and the day everything finally broke open. They moved in fully. That was the first thing. Marcus said it made more sense than driving back and forth, and I agreed because I genuinely wanted my son nearby. Nicole brought boxes. Good boxes. The kind from U-Haul with the handles, the kind people bring when they're not planning to leave quickly. She took over the second bedroom, and within a week, she had reorganized my kitchen in a way that made it impossible for me to find anything. She changed my grocery delivery preferences without asking. She scheduled a cleaning service again without asking, and gave the woman a key to the front door. She signed up for notifications from my pharmacy so she would know when my prescriptions were ready. Every single one of these things she presented as a kindness. Every single one of them was a transfer of control so small and so gentle that I was meant to barely notice each one individually, only realizing far too late how many I had allowed. But I noticed. The thing about spending 40 years in the contracting business is that you learn to read a job site. You learn to look at what's actually being built, not what people say they're building. Nicole said she was helping. What Nicole was building was a picture. She was building the picture of a frail, dependent, mildly impaired older man who needed guidance and oversight, and eventually someone else to make decisions on his behalf. She mentioned the power of attorney again. Casually, over dinner one Tuesday. She mentioned it the way you mention something you've mentioned before and expect resistance to, the sigh already prepared in advance. It's just practical, Harold. If anything happens, Marcus needs to be able to act quickly. You wouldn't want the courts getting involved. Marcus was looking at his plate. I have an attorney, I said. Of course, but an attorney takes time. In an emergency, I have an attorney, I said again. And a plan. Everything is handled. She smiled. I'm sure it is. What bothered me most about that smile wasn't the coldness in it, though it was cold. What bothered me was the certainty. She smiled like a woman who has already counted the money and found the number correct. 3 days later, I found her in my home office. She was at my desk. My filing cabinet was open. She had a folder in her hands, a folder from the section I kept my financial documents in, and she was reading it, with the focused attention of someone who was not browsing but searching. She heard me this time. She looked up. For one full second, neither of us spoke. I was looking for the insurance documents, she said. Marcus said they might be in here. For the car. There was a question about coverage. The car insurance is in the glove compartment, I said, where it has always been. She put the folder down. She walked past me out of the office, close enough that I could smell her perfume. She did not apologize. I went to the desk. I looked at what she had been reading. It was the documentation for my investment account, the one with a little over $400,000 in it, the one Eleanor and I had spent 30 years building together. I stood there for a moment. Then I picked up my phone and sent Raymond a text that said 3 words. Move it up. What I had asked Raymond to do, back in that first meeting, was review and revise everything. My will, my accounts, the deed to the house, all of it. We had discussed options I will not detail here because they are not the point. The point is that by the time Nicole was standing in my office reading my financial documents, the account she was looking at had already been restructured in ways that were not visible from the outside. Eleanor used to say that the difference between a trap and a door is which side you're on when it closes. But I'm getting ahead of myself. There is something else I need to tell you about, something that matters more to me than any of the money or the property or any of it. His name is Danny. Danny is 6 years old. Marcus and Nicole adopted him 2 years ago, before the stroke, before any of this. At the time, I thought it was a wonderful thing. I thought it meant something good about who Marcus still was underneath whatever Nicole had been making of him. I was relieved. But Danny was not what Nicole had hoped for. I don't know exactly what she had imagined, whether she thought the adoption would improve her marriage, or give her something to post photographs of, or serve some other purpose I couldn't see. What I know is that by the time they moved into my house, Danny was a quiet, careful child who watched the adults around him with eyes that were too old for his face. He stayed close to the walls. He spoke softly. He said please and thank you with the precision of a child who has learned that forgetting to say them has consequences. He reminded me of myself at that age, actually. I grew up in a house where you learned to read the room before you walked into it. I started taking Danny to the park on Saturday mornings. Just the 2 of us, while Marcus and Nicole slept in. We would walk the 3 blocks down to Riverside Park, and Danny would climb on the equipment, and I would sit on the bench with my coffee and watch him. And sometimes he would come and sit next to me, and we would just be quiet together, which is something 6-year-olds rarely do, and which, when they do it, means something. One Saturday he asked me if I was sad. Sometimes, I said. I miss my wife. Marcus's mom? Yes. He thought about this. Nicole said she was difficult. I looked at him. He was looking at the pigeons near the fountain, not at me. The way children deliver news they know is significant. Eleanor was the least difficult person I ever knew, I said. She was the easiest person in the world to love. Danny nodded slowly like he was filing this information somewhere important. We didn't talk about it again. But after that, He started reaching for my hand when we crossed the street. Not because he needed help. He had been crossing streets by himself in the park for weeks. He reached for my hand because he wanted to. Now I need to tell you about the morning it all came apart. It was a Wednesday in early November, cold enough for the furnace to have kicked on overnight. I was up at 5:30 the way I always am, made coffee, sat at the kitchen table reading the news on my tablet. Marcus and Nicole were still in bed. At 6:15 my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, local area code. The man on the other end identified himself as someone from a company called Clarity Estate Partners. He said he understood I was interested in discussing a potential arrangement regarding the property at my address. He said Nicole had mentioned that the family was exploring options for simplifying the asset structure going forward. I asked him to repeat what he'd just said. He repeated it. I told him I was not interested, and I ended the call. I put the phone down on the kitchen table. I looked at my coffee. I looked out the window at the maple tree, which was mostly bare now. Just a few orange leaves left on the high branches. I thought about Eleanor planting the roses. I thought about Marcus at 7 years old helping me pour the concrete for the back patio, how serious he was about it, how carefully he smoothed the surface with his small hands. Then I got up, walked down the hall, and knocked on the bedroom door. Marcus answered it in a t-shirt and sweatpants, half asleep. "Somebody called me," I said. "Clarity Estate Partners." He woke up completely. It happened in about 1 second, the sleep going out of his face like a light turning off. "Dad, does Nicole know someone at a company called Clarity Estate Partners?" Behind him, I could see Nicole sitting up in bed, and I saw it the same thing I'd seen months ago when she was standing in my office. That single second of pure calculation before the practiced expression replaced it. "It was just exploratory," she said. "Just information. There are financial strategies that could benefit everyone." "Nicole." My voice was even. I had been preparing for this conversation for 6 weeks without knowing exactly what shape it would take, and now that it was here, I found I was not angry the way I'd expected to be. I was very, very calm. "I need you to understand something. This house belongs to me. My accounts belong to me. My decisions belong to me." I had a mild stroke. I did not lose my mind. "Of course you didn't," but the doctors said. "I spoke to my attorney 6 weeks ago," I said. "The week after I came home from the hospital. Everything has already been arranged. The house, the accounts, the investments. All of it is structured in a way that cannot be accessed, transferred, or altered without my direct authorization and the involvement of my attorney. I want you to understand that clearly." The room was quiet. Marcus was looking at the floor. "I'd like you both to be dressed and in the living room at 9 o'clock, I said. "Raymond is coming at 9:30. I went back to the kitchen. I called Raymond. Then I went to Danny's room, knocked softly, and opened the door a crack. He was awake, sitting up with a stuffed rabbit, watching the door. "Good morning," I said. "You want pancakes?" "Yeah," he said, very quiet. "Okay, come on." We made pancakes. I let him pour the batter because he liked the sound it made hitting the pan. We ate at the kitchen table, and I read him the comics from my tablet, and outside the maple tree stood bare against the gray November sky, and down the hall I could hear the low, urgent sound of Marcus and Nicole talking, the specific cadence of people disagreeing about strategy. Raymond arrived at 9:28. He is a tall man, Raymond, white-haired, the kind of attorney who looks like Central Casting sent him over. He shook my hand at the door, glanced at Danny, who was on the living room floor with his rabbit, and then looked at Marcus and Nicole on the couch. "Good morning," he said pleasantly, like this was any other meeting. He sat down across from them and opened his briefcase and took out several documents and laid them on the coffee table, and I watched Nicole's eyes move to them immediately, scanning, trying to read them upside down. Raymond looked up at her. "The house," he said, "was transferred to a revocable living trust 14 years ago. Harold is the trustee and the sole beneficiary. Upon Harold's death, the successor trustee is appointed, and that is not Marcus." He said the last part without any change in his tone. "Just information. The investment accounts are similarly structured. Harold made additional modifications 6 weeks ago that I'll summarize briefly." He did so, briefly and clearly. Nicole said, "He can undo a trust. He can amend it. Raymond agreed. He hasn't, and he won't. Marcus made a sound. Not words, just a sound. Something low and defeated. What I'd like to address directly, Raymond continued, looking now at Nicole, is the matter of the phone call Harold received this morning from Clarity Estate Partners. I'll be reaching out to them today. I'll also be following up regarding the filing cabinet incident in October, which Harold documented at the time. That was a misunderstanding. I'm sure it was. Raymond folded his hands on his knee. I want to make sure there are no further misunderstandings. That's all this is. A clarification. Harold isn't angry. He loves his son. But he is not transferring anything. And he is not signing anything. And he is not confused about his own circumstances. The room was very quiet. Then Nicole looked at me, and I want to be precise about this, because I've thought about it many times since she looked at me, not with anger, but with something that was almost respect, like a chess player acknowledging a move they hadn't seen coming. I suppose we should think about finding our own place, she said. I think that's probably best, I said. Yes. What happened next was not dramatic. There was no shouting. There was no scene. Nicole and Marcus packed over the following 2 weeks. Marcus and I talked once. A real conversation. The first one in a long time, and I told him what I had seen, and he was quiet for a long time, and then he said he knew, and I told him I loved him, and he said, I know, and we left it there for now, which felt honest. The last morning, Danny came to find me in the kitchen. Nicole had already loaded the car twice. Marcus was carrying a box. Danny stood in the doorway with his rabbit under his arm, and his face was doing the thing it sometimes did, where it was completely still and completely complicated at the same time. I crouched down to his level. I don't want to go, he said. I had already spoken with Raymond about this. I had already spoken with a family services attorney Raymond knew. I had been thinking about it since October, since that morning in the park when Danny told me what Nicole had said about Eleanor. I know, I said. I don't want you to go either. He looked at me. I've been talking to some people, I said. Some important people. About whether there's something we can do about that. It's going to take some time and there's going to be some paperwork and some meetings and I need you to be patient with me. Can you do that? He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he nodded. Okay, he said. I hugged him carefully. He hugged me back hard, the way children hug when they mean it with their whole body. I'll see you Saturday, I said. The park. The pigeons, he said. The pigeons, I agreed. They left at noon. I stood in the front doorway and watched the car until it turned the corner and was gone, and then I went inside and I made fresh coffee, and I sat in Eleanor's green armchair back in its place by the window where it belonged, and I looked at the maple tree, and I let out a breath that felt like it had been building for a very long time. Eleanor would have handled it differently. She would have confronted Nicole in the first week before any of it had a chance to take root. She was always braver than me in the sharp moments, quicker to name what was happening while I was still hoping I was wrong about it. I miss her for 1,000 reasons, but I miss her especially for that, for her willingness to say the true thing out loud before I'd worked up to it. But I handled it. In February, Raymond called me with news from the family court process, which was proceeding in a direction I had hoped for but hadn't let myself count on. Marcus had agreed to something we hadn't expected him to agree to. I think the conversation we had in those final 2 weeks shifted something in him. I think underneath whatever Nicole had built in him, Marcus had been ashamed for a long time. And shame, when it finally gets enough air, sometimes turns into something better than it started as. I'm telling you this part because I know what you're wondering about. I know because I would be wondering the same thing. Danny comes to the park on Saturdays. He still comes to the park on Saturdays. We still feed the pigeons and drink hot chocolate from the thermos I bring, and sit on the bench and are quiet together in the way that means something. The legal process is ongoing. These things take time, and I have learned to be patient with time. What I can tell you is that Raymond has filed the necessary paperwork, that the court-appointed evaluator has met with Danny 3 times, that Danny told the evaluator I was the person who made him feel safe, and that the evaluator wrote that down in a report that now exists permanently in a file in a courthouse 12 blocks from my house. What I can tell you is that I have a bedroom ready. The one with the window that looks out at the maple tree. The one with the good morning light. I painted it myself, which my physical therapist told me was probably too much for my left hand, and which I did anyway, because some things you need to do yourself. Eleanor's roses came back in the spring. They always do. I don't do anything special for them. I just leave them alone and they come back. She used to say that was the secret to roses, that people overworked them, that they knew what they were doing if you trusted them enough to let them do it. I think about that a lot now. About what grows back when you stop letting someone else decide what's worth keeping. My hand is almost entirely back to normal. I drive myself everywhere. I had a physical last month, and my doctor, who is 34 years old and extremely thorough, told me I was in remarkable shape for my age, and I told him I wasn't sure remarkable was necessary, and he said in his experience it always is. I liked him for that. Marcus called me last week. We talked for 45 minutes, which is 40 minutes longer than most of our calls have been in the past few years. He sounds different. I don't know yet what that means or how far it goes, but I know what different sounds like, and I know it matters that he called. I still sit in Eleanor's chair in the evenings. I still read in it, and sometimes I just sit in it in the dark and look out at the maple tree and think about the 31 years this house has held and everything it has seen and everything it has not yet seen. Next Saturday, Danny wants to bring bread for the ducks this time instead of the pigeons. He has informed me that ducks are better than pigeons because ducks are interesting and pigeons are just pigeons. I have given this serious consideration and told him he has a point, but that pigeons have a kind of dignity that I think deserves respect. He told me that was a weird thing to say. He's probably right, but I told him he'll understand when he's older, and he rolled his eyes in the way 6-year-olds roll their eyes when you say that, which is to say, as dramatically as possible, which made me laugh out loud in a way I hadn't laughed in a long time. There is no clear lesson I can give you here except the one I learned too late and then learned again just in time. You built what you built. You worked what you worked. You loved who you loved, and you sacrificed what you sacrificed, and none of that becomes someone else's simply because they are standing close to you when you are frightened. Fear is not a deed of transfer. Grief is not a signature. And the people who move your furniture while you're in the hospital are not the people who get to decide what happens to your house. Know what you have. Know who you trust. Keep Raymond's number in your phone. And go to the park on Saturday mornings. The ducks are better than you'd think.